In August of 1944, the SS confronted a dilemma of their own making. The issue was not an enemy on the battlefield, but a commander from their own ranks. He donned the SS uniform, held their rank, and led an entire brigade under their insignia. Yet senior officers gathered in occupied Poland and reached a chilling consensus. This man had to be eliminated before his actions disgraced the entire organization. Pause to consider that reality for a moment. The SS, the same organization orchestrating death camps, the same force that had elevated Oscar Darrewanger and his bandit brigade, the institution notorious for methodical cruelty, determined that one of its own was simply too brutal, too insubordinate, and too rapacious to continue existing. His name was Bronislav Kaminski, and the tale of how he met an SS firing squad is among the strangest, darkest episodes of the Second World War. To understand how Kaminski reached a point where even the SS considered him expendable, one must trace his history well before the outbreak of the war. He was born in 1899 in the Russian Empire to a Polish father and a German mother, a detail that would later influence German's selection of collaborators who could navigate both language and lineage. Kaminski received a solid education, displayed intelligence, and trained as a chemical engineer, a background that hardly fits the profile of a future warlord. He served briefly in the Red Army during the Russian Civil War, and afterward settled into a quiet life as a technical specialist in Soviet factories, raising a family and striving to remain unnoticed in an increasingly perilous environment. Yet Stalin's regime had little patience for quiet citizens, particularly those with foreign-sounding names or foreign-born parents. By the late 1930s, Kaminski became ensnared in the Great Purge and was dispatched to a labor camp under charges of industrial sabotage. His survival spoke volumes about his character, as enduring the Gulag required a rare combination of resilience, cunning, and the moral compromises most could never countenance. When German forces invaded the Soviet Union in the summer of 1941, Kaminski resided in Lokot, a small town in the Bryansk region, working again as an engineer. His resentment toward the Soviet state that had imprisoned him was deep, and he did not conceal it. The advancing Germans sought local administrators capable of maintaining order, ensuring supplies, and combating partisan activity emerging from central Russia's forests. Kaminski stepped forward, not hesitantly, but with remarkable ambition and fervor, surprising even his German overseers. Within months, following the assassination of the previous collaborator by partisans, Kaminski assumed control of local administration. He persuaded the German army to grant him unprecedented autonomy, a self-governing district under his command, complete with militia, courts, and taxation. This territory became the Lokot autonomy, effectively a personal fiefdom. Kaminski ran it with the structures of a state, establishing newspapers, schools, and a militia he named the Russian Liberation People's Army, widely abbreviated as ROA. However, this military force was far from conventional. Comprised largely of deserters from the Red Army, anti-Soviet peasants, opportunistic criminals, and a small faction of ideological collaborators committed to fighting communism, the ROA was notorious for two defining characteristics: brutal anti-partisan campaigns and extreme corruption. Kaminski, for his part, likely believed in some higher purpose, at least publicly, when delivering speeches. In practice, his men terrorized villages suspected of partisan support, summarily executed civilians, and plundered every asset they could carry. The German command noticed, though they were overwhelmed on multiple fronts. As long as Kaminski kept the forests quiet and met grain quotas, they tolerated his excesses. A useful butcher, after all, remains useful. This uneasy arrangement persisted until the war's momentum shifted. By the summer of 1943, after Stalingrad's disaster and Kursk's failure, the Red Army began pushing west, placing the Lokot autonomy squarely in its path. Kaminski acted as any warlord would. He retreated westward with the Germans, relocating first to Belarus and ultimately to Poland. Along the journey, the ROA continued its signature terror, spreading fear among local populations. Reports of their actions reached German command and caused unease, yet no senior officer was eager to intervene. Kaminski remained a convenient asset amid mounting crises. That is when Heinrich Himmler entered the narrative, steering events toward a grim climax. Ever intent on expanding the Waffen-SS into a multinational ideological force, Himmler had absorbed units of questionable reliability, including Darrewanger's band of poachers, criminals, and concentration camp inmates. In the summer of 1944, Himmler targeted Kaminski, officially redesignating the ROA as the 29th Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS, Russian number 1, and granting Kaminski the rank of Waffen Brigadier, a nominal generalship. Though appearing as a promotion, the title imposed strict limitations. Integration into the SS subjected Kaminski to its hierarchy, regulations, and judicial authority, constraints foreign to his previous 3 years of near autonomy. A collision was inevitable. The catalyst appeared in Warsaw. On the 1st of August, 1944, the Polish Home Army initiated a full-scale uprising, anticipating Soviet support from across the Vistula. Stalin, uninterested in enabling a non-communist Polish liberation, stalled his advance. The Germans, caught off guard, turned to Himmler, who resolved to crush the revolt with extreme force, deploying the most notorious units available, Derwanger and Kaminski. Those familiar with Derwanger understand the horror that combination foretold. For others, it suffices to say the violence that followed in Western Warsaw is among the most harrowing of the war. Kaminski arrived with approximately 1,700 hand-picked ROA troops, assigned to the OTO district, a dense residential area containing families and the Radium Institute, one of Europe's largest cancer hospitals. What unfolded was not a conventional military engagement. The Home Army presence in OTO was limited and lightly armed, leaving Kaminski's men free to enact terror. For several days, they moved systematically through buildings, executing civilians, seizing property, and committing atrocities against patients and staff at the Radium Institute, horrors documented in post-war trials and testimonies. Casualty estimates for the OTO district alone number in the thousands. Yet the violence was not Kaminski's undoing. The SS demanded brutality, and he delivered it. The problem arose from the conduct of his troops. Rather than pressing the attack, they lingered, plundering apartments, removing wallpaper, carpets, jewelry, watches, vodka, fur coats, and other valuables, transporting them behind German lines. The advance stalled because soldiers prioritized theft over combat. Reports from attached German officers painted a chaotic picture. Kaminski's men were robbing Polish, civilians, and even German army supplies, including convoys belonging to other SS units. One exasperated report described them less as soldiers than as marauders. The final tipping point occurred when a Kaminski-led unit ambushed a vehicle transporting SS personnel, potentially linked to Erich von Box-Zelewski, the senior commander overseeing the uprising's suppression. Box-Zelewski, a veteran of anti-partisan warfare responsible for mass killings, was pragmatic. An army that loots itself cannot endure. Moreover, German documentation reveals that ROA behavior in Warsaw threatened to tarnish the prestige of the SS itself. Complaints arrived from Wehrmacht units, and even Hans Frank, governor of occupied Poland, voiced concern over the uncontrollable chaos. There were accounts suggesting that some German soldiers, appalled by the atrocities they witnessed, had intervened to halt individual acts of violence, an almost unimaginable reaction in the summer of 1944. The decision then fell to Box-Zelewski, sanctioned at the highest echelons of the SS. Kaminski had to be eliminated. The challenge lay in executing this without provoking mutiny among the 1,700 armed ROA troops stationed in Warsaw, fiercely loyal to their commander, fully equipped, and capable of turning their weapons against the Germans if betrayal was suspected. The method chosen combined cunning with calculated cruelty. Kaminski was summoned to SS headquarters in Lodz under the pretext of receiving new orders regarding his unit's deployment. He was reassured that his logistical concerns would be personally addressed by senior officers. Accepting the summons, he departed in a car accompanied by a small escort. Somewhere between Warsaw and Lodz, around the 19th of August, 1944, the vehicle was intercepted. Details of what followed remain partially obscured, as the SS systematically destroyed much of the documentation. However, the most widely supported account, corroborated by post-war testimonies of German officers, holds that Kaminski was transported to a secluded location, swiftly tried by an improvised SS tribunal for charges of looting and insubordination, and executed, along with select members of his personal staff. What followed was a deliberate cover-up, revealing the SS's meticulous concern for its image. The Germans understood that openly acknowledging Kaminski's execution risked collapsing the ROA or inciting them to retaliate. To preserve appearances, they returned to ROA headquarters and announced solemnly that their esteemed commander had been ambushed and murdered by Polish partisans while conducting official business. A bullet-riddled wrecked car, complete with staged bloodstains, was presented to ROA officers as proof. Some senior members reportedly doubted the story. The idea that partisans could successfully strike a high-ranking SS officer so far behind German lines seemed ludicrous. Yet no one voiced suspicion, aware that probing questions could invite the same fate Kaminski had met. Without Kaminski's leadership, the ROA quickly descended into chaos. Infighting, desertion, and operational ineffectiveness engulfed the unit. Within weeks, it was withdrawn from Warsaw, formally disbanded as a Waffen-SS division, and its surviving members absorbed into other collaborator formations, most notably the Russian Liberation Army under General Vlasov, itself destined for grim dissolution at the war's end. Many former ROA soldiers fell into Red Army hands or were turned over by Western allies, facing execution or imprisonment in labor camps. A few managed to escape to South America or conceal themselves in Western Europe under false identities, but the brigade ceased to exist as an organized force. The core question that emerges from this episode is not about Kaminski as an individual. He was straightforward in his cruelty, a clever, ambitious opportunist who seized the German invasion as a path to rebuild his shattered life, indifferent to the human cost. The more compelling question concerns the system surrounding him. The SS, priding itself on discipline, ideology, and a perverse sense of honor, deliberately cultivated and tolerated men like Kaminski when useful, only to dispose of them silently when they became liabilities. The same hands that conferred a general's rank upon Kaminski in July 1944 also authorized his execution in August. The same propaganda apparatus that lauded him as a heroic anti-communist fighter subsequently portrayed him as a martyr slain by partisans. All of this transpired while the officials who ordered his death remained safely nearby. No honor exists in this tale. No redemption. Only the unflinching logic of an organization willing to consume its own once they ceased to serve a purpose. Perhaps the lesson lies there. The architects of the SS imagined themselves as the disciplined elite of a new European order, yet they constructed a machine that attracted the basest impulses from every corner it touched, clothed them in uniforms, adorned them with ranks and medals, and then turned on these very creations the instant they became inconvenient. Bronislav Kaminski was not executed for being a war criminal. Everyone around him was guilty of the same. He was eliminated because he was a war criminal who defied control. Within the SS, that was unforgivable. The thousands of civilians in the OTO district who perished under his men's hands received neither trial nor justice, and most remain unmarked by graves. Kaminski died quietly from a bullet fired by his own side, while a staged wrecked car masked the truth. If any justice exists in this, it is narrow, peculiar, and unsettling. What remains is for us to grapple with its meaning. The point arrives when Heinrich Himmler steps fully into the narrative, steering the tale into its darkest turn. In his relentless drive to transform the Waffen-SS into a sort of multinational ideological force, he had been amassing foreign contingents of increasingly dubious reliability. Units like Derwangers, comprised of poachers, convicts, and concentration camp inmates, had already been absorbed. By the summer of 1944, his attention shifted to Kaminski, and the ROA was formally reclassified as the 29th Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS Russian No. 1. Kaminski himself received the title of von Brigatafra, a ceremonious way of making him a general within the SS. On paper, it appeared as a prestigious promotion. In practice, it was a tether. Membership in the SS imposed strict discipline, the authority of SS courts, and rigid expectations, an existence Kaminski had largely avoided over the previous 3 years. Conflict was inevitable. Warsaw became the stage. On the 1st of August 1944, the Polish Home Army, loyal to the government in exile in London, initiated a full-scale uprising in Warsaw. They anticipated a swift Soviet intervention from across the Vistula, expecting liberation within days. The Soviets did not advance. Stalin, uninterested in allowing a non-communist Polish authority to claim the city's liberation, deliberately stalled, observing from the eastern bank. Meanwhile, the Germans were blindsided. Himmler chose to crush the rebellion with unparalleled cruelty, deploying his most ruthless units. The selections fell on Derwanger and Kaminski. Those familiar with Derwanger's record understand the implications. For those unacquainted, brace yourself. The western districts of Warsaw in early August 1944 would witness horrors on an unimaginable scale. Kaminski arrived with roughly 1,700 hand-picked ROA men, tasked with operations in the OTO district, a densely populated neighborhood of apartment buildings, families, and the city's Radium Institute, a major cancer hospital. The following days were marked by acts that defied any conventional definition of warfare. Home Army resistance in OTO was sparse and lightly armed, so Kaminski's men focused on a different kind of operation. They moved systematically through the district, building by building, repeating the same pattern of terror they had executed in Russian and Belarusian villages for 3 years, now magnified in a European capital. Civilians were shot in the streets, families dragged from their homes, and atrocities committed against patients and staff in the Radium Institute, all of which were later corroborated by post-war testimonies and trials. Casualty estimates for the OTO district alone reached into the thousands. Yet, shocking as the slaughter was, it was not the factor that drew the ire of Kaminski's German superiors. The SS demanded brutality. They received it. What they had not anticipated was Kaminski's men obstructing operational progress. They lingered, distracted by plunder, stripping apartments of carpets, jewelry, watches, vodka, furs, and anything transportable, funneling their loot behind the lines. The district's conquest, expected to span days, slowed almost to a standstill. German officers filed urgent complaints, noting that Kaminski's men were not just looting civilian homes. They were seizing German army stores, commandeering vehicles, and even, in one instance, ambushing a convoy of another SS unit. One frustrated report described them as behaving less like soldiers and more like marauding bandits. The breaking point came when Kaminski's troops targeted a vehicle carrying SS personnel, potentially linked to Erich von Bach-Zalewski, the senior officer directing suppression of the uprising. Bach-Zalewski, seasoned in anti-partisan warfare, had sanctioned operations that resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths. Yet he recognized that an army that pillages itself is destined to crumble. Surviving German documents reveal that the ROA's behavior in Warsaw had become so conspicuously uncontrolled that it jeopardized the prestige of the SS. Complaints came from the regular Wehrmacht and from Hans Frank, governor of occupied Poland, who feared the disorder might spread. He and some German soldiers, horrified by what they witnessed, intervened to stop individual atrocities, an almost unthinkable action in the summer of 1944. Boxalewski made a decisive call. Ratified at the highest SS levels, Kaminski must be removed. The challenge was immense, eliminating him without provoking revolt among the 1,700 armed ROA men, fiercely loyal to their commander and fully capable of retaliating if they sensed treachery. The method devised was cruelly ingenious. Kaminski was summoned to SS headquarters in Lodz under the pretense of discussing the unit's future deployment and receiving updated orders. Assured that logistical concerns would be personally addressed by senior command, he departed with a small escort. Somewhere between Warsaw and Lodz, around the 19th of August 1944, the vehicle was intercepted. The subsequent events remain partially obscured. SS documents were deliberately destroyed. Yet the most widely accepted account, supported by post-war German testimony, states that Kaminski was taken to a secluded location, subjected to a swift trial by an improvised SS court on charges of looting and insubordination, and executed alongside certain members of his personal staff. Following this came the cover-up, revealing the SS's obsession with image. The Germans understood that admitting Kaminski's execution could incite the ROA to fragment or retaliate. They returned to ROA headquarters with a story. Their revered commander had been ambushed and murdered by Polish partisans during official duties. To reinforce the deception, a wrecked, bullet-pocked car, supposedly Kaminski's, was displayed complete with staged bloodstains and bullet holes. Senior ROA officers reportedly doubted the tale. The idea that partisans could strike a senior SS officer so far behind German lines seemed absurd. Yet suspicion remained unspoken, for questioning the narrative would likely invite the same fate Kaminski had met. Without their leader, the ROA descended into internal conflict, desertions, and operational paralysis. Within weeks, it was withdrawn from Warsaw, officially disbanded as a Waffen-SS division, and its surviving members absorbed into other collaborationist formations, notably the Russian Liberation Army under General Velisov, which itself would meet grim destruction by war's end. Many former ROA soldiers were captured by the Red Army or handed over by the Western Allies, facing execution or labor camps. A few evaded capture, fleeing to South America or concealing themselves in Western Europe under false identities. The brigade ceased to exist as a functioning force. The question that lingers is not Kaminski himself. He was a cunning, ambitious, and relentlessly cruel opportunist who seized the German invasion as a chance to rebuild his life, indifferent to the human toll. The broader question concerns the system around him. The SS, priding itself on discipline, ideology, and a perverse sense of honor, fostered men like Kaminski when they were useful, only to eliminate them when they became liabilities. The same officers who elevated Kaminski to general in July 1944 authorized his execution in August. The propaganda machinery that lauded him as a heroic anti-communist fighter then declared him a martyr at the hands of partisans, all while the decision-makers remained nearby. There is no honor, no redemption. Only the cold calculation of an organization that devours its own once they cease to serve a purpose. Perhaps the lesson lies there. Those who created the SS imagined a disciplined elite shaping a new European order, yet they forged a machine that magnified the worst impulses of every nation it touched, dressing them in uniforms, bestowing ranks and medals, then turning on their creations the moment they became inconvenient. Bronislav Kaminski was not executed for being a war criminal. Everyone around him was guilty. He was eliminated because he could not be controlled, the unforgivable sin in the SS. The thousands of civilians in OTO who perished under his men's hands never had a trial, never received justice, and most remain unmarked by graves. Kaminski died from a bullet fired by his own side in a secluded field near Lodz, while a staged car masked the truth. Any justice in this is narrow, strange, and unsettling, leaving us to grapple with its meaning. Please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.